In our time, when conversation turns toward these deeper matters, when someone speaks of the possibility that spiritual life might be known alongside the world of the senses, they are often met with a quiet sympathy. At the very least, a question arises. Is there a path, some way by which a human being might come to a form of spiritual understanding? Most are willing to accept this, so long as that knowledge remains distant, undefined, wrapped in broad ideas and gentle impressions. Perhaps a vague sense that all things are connected. Perhaps a mood of mysticism, felt more than known. But the moment one dares to go further, the moment one attempts to describe a real picture of the universe, to speak of origins and evolution in clear and specific terms, the conversation often ends. To suggest that a person today might speak responsibly about a spiritual source of the world, about forces shaping existence beyond what the eye can see, or about an evolution that moves from spirit into matter and perhaps back again, this is where resistance appears. The modern, enlightened mind steps back. Such claims are quietly avoided. They are labeled as unsafe territory, as speculation best left untouched. At worst, they are seen as signs that the speaker has wandered too far. And yet it is not my intention here to offer detailed cosmology, nor to overwhelm with explanations. Instead, I wish to show things simpler, and perhaps more important. I wish to show how a spiritual science can arrive at an understanding of the universe, and how it can recognize the inner impulses that guide the unfolding of the world. A familiar criticism soon appears, that anyone who speaks in this way must be projecting human thoughts and feelings onto the cosmos itself, that such a worldview is merely imagination, colored by preference and desire. But a closer look reveals something else. The approach I am describing does not borrow from emotion or wishful thinking. It seeks its conclusions through a form of inner observation as disciplined and objective as the methods used to study nature. This path does not reject science. On the contrary, it honors everything humanity has gained over the last centuries: careful thinking, honest doubt, and the patient search for truth. It does not attempt to cross boundaries blindly. It watches closely, asking where natural knowledge truly reaches its limits, and where those limits may only appear to exist. Much has been written about such boundaries. Philosophers and scientists alike have tried to define them. Many have followed the guidance of influential thinkers from the past. Yet there is a subtle danger here. These guides are sharp and persuasive, but they stop short. They examine human knowing only from one direction. They draw a line and then insist that nothing lies beyond it. But when we begin to consider the human being as a whole, body, soul, and inner life together, a different picture emerges. A one-sided view of knowing leads only to one-sided conclusions. If we truly wish to understand the relationship between humanity and the world, we must take the human being in the fullness of what they are. And from this wider perspective, a new question naturally arises. If the limits we speak of were not fixed walls but thresholds, what then would be humanity's place in the universe? If our capacity for understanding can already penetrate into the laws of nature, into life itself, why should it stop there? Why should it not also extend into the deeper realms, into soul, into spirit, into the greater story of existence itself? Let us imagine for a moment that the everyday awareness we use in science and in ordinary life had no boundaries at all, that it could not only observe the outer appearance of things, but always pass beneath the surface, straight into their inner nature. If knowledge had no limits, what kind of being would the human being then have to be? His relationship with the world would change completely. His entire nature, even the most inward part of himself, would be constantly reaching outward, touching everything, penetrating everything, with unbroken clarity. At first, this may sound like an ideal, yet a quiet observation of life reveals something unexpected. A being whose ordinary consciousness had no limits would slowly lose the ability to love. And when we reflect on what love means for human life, on everything we become because we are able to love, we arrive at a simple truth. On this earth, we could not truly be human without love. Love requires distance. It requires that we meet another being, human or otherwise, as a self-contained presence. We must not overtake the other with sharp, penetrating thought. We must not dissolve them with clear and lucid concepts. At the very moment love awakens, something different within us becomes active, something beyond precise definition, beyond cold clarity. If we were able to fully grasp another being with pure intellect, love would quietly fade away. And since the human being is meant to be a creature of love, since this capacity shapes our entire existence, we must accept something else as well. We must accept that our ordinary knowledge needs limits. It must stop at a certain threshold if we are to fulfill our task on earth. The very quality that allows us to love has another side, a boundary placed upon our knowing. We do not know everything so that we may love anything at all. This is only an outline, one that each person can complete for themselves. Yet even this outline leads to important consequences. It shows us that we must move beyond a one-sided view of human knowledge and begin to see the human being as a whole, living, feeling, willing, and thinking together. This is one of the guiding principles of the worldview I am describing when it speaks about the limits of scientific knowledge. The second principle is equally important. Any worldview that wishes to be taken seriously today must not lose itself in vague or drifting mysticism. It is understandable that many thoughtful minds, recognizing the limits of natural science, turn inward, hoping to find a bridge to deeper realities. Yet this path, too, has its boundaries. Mysticism seeks the foundations of existence by looking within the human being. But inner observation, like outer observation, has limits of its own. If a person could look endlessly into themselves, down to the deepest layers of their being, where personal existence seems to touch the greater life of the cosmos, what would they lose? Those who find comfort in mysticism often bring forth powerful inner images. But a careful study of the soul shows that these images are often transformed memories of outer experience. What was once perceived from the world sinks into hidden layers of the soul, is reshaped by feeling and will, and later rises again in a new and unfamiliar form. This transformation can be so complete that one may believe they are touching eternal truths springing directly from the soul itself. Even great mystics of the past were not entirely free from this subtle confusion, mistaking inner images for independent revelations of ultimate reality. Calm and honest reflection, however, allows us to return to the essential question: what would the human being have to give up if ordinary consciousness could look endlessly inward at any moment without limit? Such a being would have to live without something essential to the healthy order of the soul, a reliable, inwardly coherent memory. To understand this, we must look quietly at what memory truly is and how it comes into being. When we meet the outer world and allow our experiences to live on within us, what later returns as memory does not arise from the deepest core of our being. What we encounter outwardly is first received, then gently transformed, and finally reflected inward. It is as though the spiritual result of our outer experience falls upon a mirror within us. This image is only a comparison, and yet it is more than a metaphor. Outer impressions must not strike us so deeply that they are carried into the very depths of our being. They must be reflected. Our organism, our whole nature, must function as a kind of reflecting surface. Should we then attempt to break through this reflection in order to reach what lies behind it? This, without realizing it, is what certain mystical efforts attempt to do. But we need the mirror. We need the order and reliability of memory. Where memory becomes fractured, where gaps appear, even reaching back into childhood, the soul loses its balance. The human being must be formed in such a way that experiences from the world can be retained, ordered, and recalled. For this reason, we cannot be constituted to penetrate directly into the deepest core of ourselves with ordinary consciousness. When we attempt to do so, we do not pass beyond the mirror, we encounter only its surface. And this is not a failure, it is a protection. From the standpoint of our humanity, it is right that we meet there the inner images formed from outer life. Only by seeing the human being as a whole, as one who must remember, must love, must remain balanced, can we understand why ordinary consciousness cannot become mystical. Thus, ordinary awareness meets two boundaries, one at the edge of the outer sensory world, and one at the threshold of inward mystical striving. And yet, it is precisely from a clear recognition of these two limits that another path becomes possible, a path more fitting for the modern search for spiritual understanding. This path seeks to awaken dormant powers of knowing within the soul, not by forcing ordinary consciousness beyond its bounds, but by cultivating a different form of awareness altogether. In this way, the spiritual world can be approached with clarity and responsibility. When we look at the human being as both a bearer of memory and a being capable of love, we begin to see why ordinary consciousness, working through the senses and the intellect, must come to a halt before the outer world. Only by accepting itself as an instrument for ordering external reality can it mature into something more. From this acceptance, there arises a living form of thinking. When this living thinking turns back and observes what happens within us as we stand before nature, something remarkable appears. At the very moment our thinking becomes capable of truly ordering experience, ordinary consciousness grows quiet. It does not disappear, but it slips partially into the background, like a gentle sleep. This happens because another faculty must come into activity, one that carries more than abstract thought into the world, one that carries our very being. For wherever love is present, our relationship to the world is no longer merely one of knowing, but one of reality, a living participation. Through living thinking, we begin to pour ourselves outward. We follow subtle rhythms of existence that move through the world. And by cultivating a quiet, open awareness, we gradually enter a deeper dimension of experience, one woven into the sensory world, yet extending beyond it. Compared to ordinary awareness, this form of knowing feels like waking from sleep. We become witnesses to our own becoming. This realization can strike the soul more deeply than anything gained through inward absorption alone. More powerful than retreating into oneself is the moment we recognize that higher knowing requires us to give ourselves to the world. That understanding can transform knowledge into life, into genuine participation in what surrounds us. At first, this is accompanied by a strengthening of the sense of self. It is as though, where once our gaze reached outward, we now feel ourselves enclosed from within, surrounded by subtle inner boundaries. And yet, within this experience, there must also live self-surrender, the openness that arises from love. In higher forms of knowing, the self grows stronger, and with this strength comes a quiet danger that love might harden into self-assertion, that the self might push itself into the world instead of meeting it openly. For this reason, great care is required. That is why such emphasis must be placed on inner preparation, on self-discipline, on cultivating love in ordinary life before approaching higher forms of awareness. Only a soul that is balanced and healthy in body, in feeling, and in thought can approach deeper realities without distortion. When this balance is present, the experience need not be feared. Yes, it can be powerful. Yes, it can be deeply moving. But what is gained does not settle into memory. If it did, we might walk through life absorbed in our own inner qualities, and that would lead us away from genuine humanity. True understanding at this level does not invite self-contemplation. It calls us back, again and again, into life itself. If we keep all of this in mind, we begin to understand how to rightly value the demands placed upon higher, non-sensory knowledge. From an intellectual point of view, this clarifies the relationship between deeper forms of knowing and the human capacity for love. But what do we actually experience when we move in this direction? As we have already seen, the self grows stronger, and yet at the same time it flows outward. We give ourselves to our surroundings, and through this outward movement, the self steps into a wider, more subtle realm of existence. Here we encounter something unexpected. By learning to enter the world more fully and more consciously, we begin to gain true insight into our own soul and our spiritual nature. This is why the instinct that resists endless inward brooding is, in a sense, a healthy one. A form of self-absorption that circles endlessly within does not lead to genuine understanding. True self-knowledge does not arise from withdrawing into oneself. It arises when the human being strengthens dormant powers of understanding and uses them to explore the world. It is in the world that we discover ourselves. To reach a deeper knowledge of reality in the modern sense, we must often turn familiar ideas almost upside down. This is especially true when we speak of self-knowledge. Do not merely look inward, look outward. Let your perception expand. Allow your awareness to enter the breadth of existence, strengthened by inner discipline and clarity of thought. Then, within this widening horizon, you will encounter your true self, The universe allows us to enter into it, and what it gives back to us in return is knowledge of who we are. There is another aspect of experience that is often sought along misleading inward paths. It concerns the human will. The will, too, can be trained and refined. It can be developed until the whole human being becomes a kind of organ of perception, not a physical one, but a spiritual one. Just as the human eye must be clear and selfless to receive light, so must our inner nature become transparent. If the eye were to assert itself, to fill itself with substance, vision would immediately fade. In the same way, our soul and spirit must grow clear and open. Only then can the forces of the will carry us into a deeper reality, even while we live within the physical world. At this point, something remarkable occurs. By learning to perceive the spiritual dimension of the world, we also learn to understand our own inner nature. When we stand before the outer world as sensory beings, we enter into it fully and carry away impressions, memory images that shape our inner life. In this sense, our soul is woven from what the world has given to us as image. What exists outside as physical reality appears within us as inner picture. But the process also works in the opposite direction. When we learn to look outward through the deeper self, as through a spiritual organ, and perceive the world as a living spiritual reality, something surprising takes place. We begin to perceive our own physical nature. We gain insight into the living substance of lungs, heart, and other organs. The spiritual reality of the world is reflected inward as bodily awareness, just as the physical world is reflected inward as thought and memory. The path of knowing oneself by knowing the world thus becomes very concrete. We begin to sense how each part of the human being has its place within the whole. We perceive the harmony between inner processes, and here we encounter a decisive insight. What inward mysticism often seeks in unclear depths turns out, in many cases, to be transformed memory. These memories are frequently mixed with subtle organic processes, something the mystic does not recognize. He believes he has passed beyond the inner mirror of memory. In truth, he has not. What happens instead is that organic life moves like waves against the far side of that mirror. What appears inwardly is merely a changed reflection. This realization does not diminish what is beautiful or poetic, but it does ask us to look more clearly. Much that appears deeply mystical can, upon careful observation, be understood as the echo of inner life, not as a direct revelation of spiritual reality itself. Many mystical accounts, from ancient times and from our own, can leave a powerful impression. They are often beautiful. They feel poetic. They seem to speak from hidden depths. Yet for one who looks carefully, with a calm and objective eye, these accounts reveal something simpler. They are expressions of inner processes within human nature itself. It can feel uncomfortable to say this, almost disappointing. Something that appears mysterious and inspiring turns out to be connected with subtle processes of life working upon memory. And yet, this does not make such experiences meaningless. What matters is not whether an idea pleases us, but whether it represents an honest effort to move closer to what is real. For the serious seeker, the task is not to remain in vague inward drifting, but to prepare the soul carefully, to strengthen memory, clarity, and inner balance. Only then can one truly pass beyond the surface of inner experience and begin to see oneself clearly. When this happens, we no longer encounter isolated inner images. We encounter the effects of wide-reaching processes, processes that arise from the greater world and continue to live within us. In this way, we begin to understand the human being. What may appear, from a purely external viewpoint, as something ordinary or even crude, reveals itself as something remarkable. The inner organization of the human being is not merely biological. It is the result of the entire universe working together. When we truly come to know this, a new kind of insight arises. As we look inward with a clear and awakened awareness, we can revisit experiences held within memory. From the images our soul has absorbed through life, we can call the world before us again, not vaguely, but with inner precision. And when we also learn to understand our inner organism, how each part has its origin in the greater whole, our entire being begins to appear as something extraordinary. We experience ourselves as a living record of the universe, not through hazy inward feeling, but through a wakeful perception of the soul. We come to sense the nature of lungs and heart, of the entire organism. not as isolated mechanisms, but as expressions of a deeper order. The human being reveals itself as a memory of the world. Just as our personal history is preserved within the soul, so too does our very structure bear witness to the history of the cosmos. This is knowledge of the human being as a reflection of world evolution itself. The first step towards such insight is not speculation, but preparation. It requires careful exercises, not the brooding introspection that turns endlessly inward, but a form of self-knowledge that recognizes each inner organ as a harmony of spiritual forces shaped by cosmic processes. When this view is understood, the accusation of projecting human qualities onto the universe loses its force. For the approach is the opposite. We first seek to understand the human being deeply, and through this understanding, the cosmos reveals itself. Just as personal memories reveal the story of a life, the human being reveals the story of the world. To contemporary thinking, this may sound paradoxical, and yet there is already a quiet readiness to follow such thoughts. With practice, these ideas become living. They gain warmth and clarity. And when the will is developed alongside thought, this form of self-knowledge becomes more accessible. We then recognize something essential. As the self moves outward into the world, we gain insight into ourselves. And as we penetrate the depths of human nature, we are led outward again, toward understanding the world. To approach these matters without self-interest or distortion, we must learn to look at the human being in a way different from what is common today. Only then can knowledge become both clear and alive. Today, people examine the human being by separating him into systems: bone, muscle, nerve, and from these observations they form a picture of what they believe his physical nature to be. From this, it becomes easy to imagine the human being as something solid, as though he were built from fixed material parts. And yet, everyone knows this picture is incomplete. The greater part of the human being is not solid at all. It is fluid. The air we breathe was only moments ago part of the world around us, and soon it will be again. It passes through us, belongs to us for a time, and then moves on. Even warmth is never still. Heat is continuously exchanged, taken in, given back. When we begin to look at the human being in this way, the idea of solid substance slowly dissolves. We recognize it as an illusion, and yet within our thinking we cling to it, as though the human being could truly be captured by anatomical outlines alone. But with the same seriousness that we speak of bones and organs, we must also speak of the fluid being, of what moves, surges, and forms within the living waters of the body. We must recognize that what takes place in the airy element of the human being also belongs to who we are. And further still, we must become aware that the air moving within us, rising and falling, circulating through the body, warming here, cooling there, is an active part of our living existence. What we usually call our spiritual life is carried within us in a very abstract way. It appears to us mostly as image, something we can only observe from within. And no matter how far physiology and anatomy advance, they cannot remove this division. Science offers us a detailed and impressive structure, yet one that differs completely from what we experience inwardly. We think, we feel, we will, and yet we find no immediate bridge between these inner experiences and the outer descriptions of the body. We can observe how psychology struggles to connect abstract inner images with external processes. The two stand far apart, and ordinary consciousness cannot easily unite them. But if we let go of prejudice, if we stop fixating on the illusion of the solid human being, and instead begin to experience ourselves as beings of fluid, of air, and of warmth, then something begins to change. By quietly feeling into ourselves, we become aware of currents of warmth and coolness, moving with the rhythm of breath and circulation. To perceive this clearly, we must first establish an inner foundation. This foundation can be developed through the path of deeper knowing I have been describing. When we learn to perceive the movement of air within us, we remain for the moment close to the physical realm. But when this perception is united with living, attentive thinking, a thinking that senses reality rather than abstraction, then a bridge appears. A bridge between what we experience within and what exists outside. And through this bridge, a new understanding of the human being slowly comes into view. When we become aware of the human being even in the subtle details of warmth and temperature, and when we allow what lives in the soul to condense, To move out of abstraction and into lived reality, a bridge begins to form. In this way, the life of the soul can unite with refined physical experience. As we learn to enter ourselves more deeply, we begin to sense how living thought moves within what might be called the airy aspect of the human being, an inner atmosphere marked by delicate variations of warmth. Gradually, we discover something remarkable. Differences in thought are not only ideas, they are events within us. A thought filled with affirmation, a quiet inner yes, such as the simple recognition that a tree is green, brings with it a gentle warmth. A thought shaped by resistance or denial, by inner distancing, carries a cooling influence. In this way, the life of the soul continues to move and shape through finer layers of existence into denser ones. We learn that the path of knowledge can be directed into the human organism itself, beginning with the soul and moving gradually toward the physical. This makes possible a deeper understanding of our own bodily nature. For the soul does not reveal itself fully until we learn to trace the different layers of existence, fluid, air, warmth, within the individual organs. The soul must first be gathered, concentrated, brought into clarity. Only then do we reach the physical nature of the human being, and by passing through it, the spiritual foundation upon which it rests. Just as memory allows us to look back and rediscover the experiences of our personal life, so too, by descending into the whole human being, we encounter something greater. We encounter the spiritual element that entered existence before birth, that passed through conception, development, and growth, and clothed itself with what the earth provides. This spiritual element becomes a memory of the world. Within us, the cosmos itself is preserved. And just as ordinary memory allows us to survey our individual past, so this deeper form of recollection allows us to survey the history of the world through inner vision. You may ask, how can we avoid confusion when we reach back to very early stages of the earth through such world memory? The answer is simple. We need only consider ordinary memory itself. Because memory is ordered, we do not mistake a childhood experience for something that happened yesterday. The content of memory carries its own sense of time. In the same way, when we truly understand the human organism, each part of it points toward a particular moment in the evolution of the world. What natural science seeks by extending observation backward in time can only be completed through self-contemplation, through a living recollection of the world itself. Without this, we remain vulnerable to curious misunderstandings when constructing theories about the origin and development of existence. A simple example may help clarify this. There is a familiar theory about the formation of the solar system, often illustrated by rotating a drop of oil so that smaller droplets separate and circle around it. A miniature model appears, and we are told that something similar occurred in the vastness of space. But such a demonstration contains a quiet oversight, for someone must stand there, turning the pin, setting the oil in motion. To be consistent, one would then have to imagine an immense presence turning the cosmic substance itself. This small example reminds us of something important. Without a deeper, more inwardly grounded understanding, our explanations of the universe remain incomplete. Only when outer knowledge is joined with inner awareness does the picture begin to approach wholeness. This point, however, is often forgotten in the kind of experiment I described. In daily life, there is something noble about forgetting oneself. But when we seek to illuminate questions that are deep and serious, this forgetting becomes a mistake. In such moments, we must not remove ourselves from the picture. The view of the world I am speaking of does not overlook this. It honors what natural science rightly discovers, yet it also includes what becomes visible to spiritual perception. Here, we do not imagine a gigantic physical figure standing behind the universe. Rather, we recognize a spiritual world working quietly within material development. In this way, the primal substance of the cosmos, that ancient nebular beginning, can be understood as permeated by spiritual beings and forces. And likewise, what science describes as the final cooling of the earth can also be seen as guided and carried by spiritual forces. Beyond that final state, these forces continue onward, bearing the spiritual essence into new realms. Just as when the human body returns to the elements of the earth, the inner being moves on into other worlds. Here, something essential for our time becomes clear. What is usually grasped only as abstract thought, what is often called the spiritual element, has been placed at an immeasurable distance from the material world. This separation has shaped our entire cultural life. Because ordinary consciousness cannot unite spirit and matter, we have developed a view of history that is purely material. We imagine the world beginning as a physical process, governed by mechanical laws, and ending as another physical process, described by thermodynamics as a final state of stillness. At the same time, we experience ourselves as human beings living within this process, emerging from it in a way that science alone cannot fully explain. If we are honest, we must admit something more. We cannot truly connect our inner life, our thinking, our feeling, our willing, with what unfolds outside us in the material world. And at the deepest level of this inner life, woven through every thought and choice, live moral impulses and religious forces. They exist within us, yet remain distant from material explanation. So the modern individual, with the consciousness of our time, may say inwardly, science leads us only to material processes. For moral meaning and spiritual purpose, we must rely on belief alone. But this view cannot satisfy a serious inner life. Even if unspoken, many people sense a quiet contradiction. If the earth arises from purely material causes, then what follows is something like a fragile formation, a kind of vapor, thinner even than clouds, almost illusory. And yet within this delicate formation lies everything that gives human life meaning: culture, art, morality, faith. We live within this tension for a time. And then, according to external calculation, the earth moves toward its final cooling, a destiny foretold by scientific observation alone. At this moment, it is as though all life on earth lies buried in a vast and silent cemetery. The most precious fruits of human existence, our finest and noblest ideals, rest side by side with the mere material substance of the earth. You may say you do not believe it, yet anyone who reflects honestly on the prevailing opinions of our time, especially those who dismiss independent spiritual insight, cannot escape the inner dissonance and the subtle pessimism that arise when one asks, what becomes of our spiritual activity if the world is understood solely in material terms, as exact science so often requires? From this tension arises the great divide of our age between moral and religious life and the material approach to reality. Under these circumstances, what is needed is a true seership, a precise vision of reality, one suited to modern human life, to build a bridge between spirit and matter. It is this vision that brings harmony to our souls. We have seen today how the spiritual within the human being flows gradually into warmth, into air, descending into coarser matter, and how this finer element lives on as thinking that breathes, that moves and flows. By cultivating this vision, we can think our way into the cosmos itself and even comprehend with understanding the so-called heat death of the earth, not merely as a physical event, but through the lens of world memory that lives within us, seeing the spiritual activity that permeates material processes. In this way, spiritual and material realms can meet in genuine reconciliation. Yet much remains in the human heart that resists such a reconciliation. For centuries, we have learned to call truth only that which rests on solid sensory observation, that which submits passively to the outer world. From these observations, natural laws are constructed, and theories are accepted only if built upon this solid base. Those who think this way are like those who believe gravity exists solely on Earth, that objects must fall toward it, and cannot comprehend the cosmos where heavenly bodies support one another. We must learn to adopt a similar perspective for the spirit, for the inner universe of knowledge. We must cultivate truths that support one another without needing sensory confirmation, truths like celestial bodies sustaining each other in the vastness. This indeed is the foundation for a true cosmology, one in which material processes are interwoven with soul and spirit. Such a cosmology is essential for modern humanity. It provides clarity even for the most immediate social tasks. But we can grasp it only when we perceive how significant truths sustain one another. This cosmology emerges from understanding the process of self-knowledge. We do not attain it by projecting our own experience outward, but by immersing ourselves in the outer world, observing, sensing, and understanding until the soul opens into self-knowledge. And as we dive into the inner being, this inner being becomes world memory, a portal to the knowledge of the cosmos. Many already sense the nature of this profound secret. Let it be expressed in two sentences. If you would know yourself, seek yourself in the expanses of the world. If you would know the world, penetrate into your own depths, for your own depths will reveal to you, as in a living world memory, the secrets of the cosmos.